You're about to enter into a new world of knowledge, curiosities, and high strangeness. This is a podcast of Straight Up Strange Productions.
You're listening to Mysteries and Monsters. I'm your host, Paul Bestall. We take a journey into some of the strange locations, cryptids and UFOs from the state of Maine. Joining us to guide us around the Pine Tree State's weirdness is author and researcher Nomar Slevik. From Stephen King's Legacy to Shadow People, and one of the creepiest Dogman encounters ever, Maine seems to have it all. But before that, of course, don't forget you can support Mysteries and Monsters by signing up at patreon.com/mystriesandmonsters. $4 a month gets you ad-free episodes, guaranteed early releases, bonus content and more, and you can click the link in the show notes. And thank you to each and every one of you that support the show with your contributions. Mysteries and Monsters is across most social media platforms. Please subscribe to the Mysteries and Monsters channel on YouTube. And don't forget you can visit mysteriesandmonsters.com for news and episodes. And you can also find our exclusive merchandise site via TeePublic, and the link for that is in the show notes too. Our intro and outro music are performed by the marvellous Weary Pines. Thank you as always to Dean Bestall for his wonderful art, and the show is produced by Mr. Brennan Storr of the Ghost Story Guys. The state of Maine awaits us to show us that the truth is indeed scarier than any fiction. The state of Maine is known to many as the home of the legendary Stephen King, but as listeners know, it's also full of strange and unusual Fortean cases. Joining me to celebrate the Pine Tree State's strangeness is author, researcher and musician Nomar Slevik. Nomar, welcome to Mystery Monsters finally.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. Long time in the making, but my technology finally caught up and I'm able to be on the show now, so thank you so much.
Hey, don't worry about it. I only started not using Skype till about May last year, so we're both in the same boat.
Wow, yeah.
Yeah, shutting Skype down kicks my arse in gear to move on to Riverside, so yeah. It happens to the best of us, Nomar.
For sure.
So as I said in the introduction, Maine is one of those places that seems to be quite famous for a couple of things, but having had a previous episode many years ago with the wonderful Michelle Cellier from the Green Hand Bookshop talking about Bigfoot in Maine, there doesn't seem to be much strangeness that hasn't occurred in Maine. It's got a real melting pot of all kinds of things. You've got some incredible UFO sightings. You've got haunted locations left, right and centre. We've got sea monsters. We've got strange stories of frog people. You've got weird sort of creature from the Black Lagoon monsters hiding in rivers, which is one of my favourite terrifying river stories I've ever heard. Black-eyed children. Stories of the tribal nations, little people. It's chock full of weirdness. So I would imagine it's quite hard not to be Fortean, Nomar.
In my opinion, I agree. It's fascinating. The high strangeness in this state blows me away all the time. And I don't know how not everyone is as ensconced in all the strangeness as I am, like it's so, there's so much of it. And, to have that you alluded to earlier, to have like the godfather of horror coming from this state, it really lends to the, creepiness and the strangeness of it all, so it's a magical place. It's a beautiful place, but it's also scary and uncanny and unexplained things happen here,
And of course, Maine is the home of the International Cryptozoology Museum.
It is.
Run by the legendary, as you mentioned, the godfather of horror, the godfather of cryptozoology, it would seem, Mr. Loren Coleman.
Love Loren. He's become a friend. In fact, just last week, my girlfriend and I ran into him at the local shopping store, into the grocery store. And we always try to have like a little wonderful interaction. And, we talked for, 4 or 5 minutes, and people are like scooting by us trying to get in and out, and Lauren and I and my girlfriend are trying to have this conversation. And his museum is actually moving up to the town where my girlfriend lives. And so this is very exciting for us. And so it was nice to catch up and be like, hey, how's the move going? And, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, he seems to be doing great. There was just a new interview with him written up in a paper. And, so he's got a whole bunch of information in there about the museum and when it's coming and all that good stuff. But yeah, love Lauren, and I'm glad you brought him up.
Well, you can't mention Maine without touching on him. It would be very poor show by me, Nomar, if I didn't pay homage to Mr. Coleman and his legendary status in our field.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, obviously Maine, as I mentioned in the introduction and as you touch on there, is become one with Stephen King, it would seem, and obviously King has used the state as a backdrop and obviously changed the names of certain places, but I would imagine it's quite interesting for people, I think, that it's only sort of recently that people have begun to understand that there's more to King's body of work than just a very twistedly brilliant imagination. There is a real template for some of it, and you surprised many of us by appearing on our screens on a recent episode of Expedition X, which has dove into this, obviously, because Derry has had a new sort of prequel series to the It books, which has gone down great guns, got rave reviews from people. My partner watched it all in about a day and a half, and I've still had too much to do, Nomar, to catch up. So how did that feel? How did you find yourself being pulled into working on Expedition X, who came looking into these legends and mysteries?
Yeah, that's that was quite the experience. So Expedition X, they wanted to do an episode on Stephen King and all of the strange legends that might have influenced his works. And so they were looking for any sort of paranormal, otherworldly, or strange sort of story that comes from the Derry area. And it was to act as a tie-in to the Welcome to Derry It series, So the producers reached out to me and, you type in my name or you type in Maine and strangeness in some way, and my name does come up there somewhere amongst other amazing people, like you said, Michelle, Lauren, Stephen, so it gets mixed up in there sometimes, and not deservedly so, in my opinion, but I appreciated it nonetheless. The producers emailed me. They asked if I had any interesting, Stephen King stories or any legends that were taking place in the Bangor, Maine area, which is the setting for Derry, Maine. Derry is Bangor, Bangor is Derry. And it turns out I did have a story. I actually gave them a big list of history and legend from Maine, and I kind of tacked on this little story experience that I had myself at an iconic location in Derry/Bangor, which is the Standpipe, which is the big water tower, the big white water tower, prominently featured in Welcome to Derry, but also in both the It movies and the 1990s movie, and also the book, spoken about by name. And I had an experience there about 15 years ago. And I'm telling the producers this story, just like at the end of our Zoom call. We got on a Zoom call and I was like, oh yeah, well, this happened. And they're like, okay, well, tell us about it. So I'm parked at the Standpipe. You're not supposed to be there after dark. That's what the sign says, no parking there after sunset. But I was up there, it was probably 11 o'clock at night. I was just chilling. I was probably smoking a cigarette or something. I've since quit, but I was probably smoking a cigarette at the time. And I was just chilling, and the Standpipe is right in front of me, probably 50 feet away. And the headlights to my vehicle are turned on, and they're pointed right at the Standpipe. And so I'm just sitting in my car smoking. I'm by myself, and I hear something to the left of me. And I look out my driver's side window. The window's down because I'm smoking. And I can see some sort of movement in the darkness. And I'm like, what the hell is that? And it got closer. So this, whatever this was about 30 feet in front of me. And it was walking towards the Standpipe, towards my headlights. And so as it got closer, I started to see what the hell this thing was. And it was some sort of humanoid form, and it was walking in a very janky manner, very weird. And it eventually got into the full beam of my headlights, and it looked like a humanoid, like a person sort of, but they were all dark. It was really tough to make out facial features or anything like that. And they kind of looked like they might have had clothes on, but it was very uniform, whatever they were wearing. And they actually ended up standing against the standpipe, in between my headlights in the front door of the standpipe. And they kind of froze. Like if they didn't move, I wouldn't see them or something. It was really strange.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm like, what the hell am I seeing? So I'm looking at this thing. And again, this is all happening in a matter of 5 or 10 seconds. And then I start to hear something else on the left side of me, out my driver's side window. So I look again, like, is it another one of these things? And I look and I don't see anything. So I look back to the thing that was in front of the standpipe and it was gone. And I was like, what the hell was that? It was humanoid. It kind of looked like a person and it walked really weird, like very janky and shaky and it's really hard to explain. So I explain this to the producers and they are all kind of looking at each other and they're like, should we tell him? And I'm like, tell me what? You have to tell me now. And they said, well, we found this story about the standpipe where this kid, he was like a teenager and he was at the top of the standpipe and he ended up falling off the standpipe, but fell in between the walls, like inside the standpipe. And when they recovered him, they found that he broke nearly every bone in his body. And that, that said to them and that said to me, maybe that janky walking thing, that really sounded, or that visual made us think of somebody walking with broken bones. So did I see the spirit of something? I don't know, but it was impressive enough for them to invite me on to the Expedition X show to tell that story. And I told that story and a couple of other things. And there were also a bunch of amazing stories shared. So my story ended up getting cut. But the experience was really interesting, seeing the behind the scenes on how some of the stuff works. And it really gives you some insight and some things not to trust as much as maybe you did beforehand in regards to, a director telling people like how to say things and,
Yes.
Wasn't my favorite part of it, but it was interesting. And I wouldn't change the experience for anything. My girlfriend was with me and we got to hear all these really great stories that took place in Bangor. So that was fun. Yeah.
I suppose as well, having watched that episode, that was a particularly strange case, even just in a normal situation for that child to have fallen in the way he did. And obviously Heather went into the standpipe and had some strange occurrences and she got told to go up. And then when she got up, she was told to come down. And
yeah.
it was like clearly something was having a bit of fun with her. But that particular story is one of those, sometimes you will hear these real life sort of basis for legends that develop or experience or haunted locations perhaps. That one's probably one of the most chilling I've heard recently because, as you say, we've got a real incident here and therefore it does lend some kind of credence to stranger things. So is it somewhere that, as you say, it's got signs telling people you can't stay here after dark? So I would imagine it's one of those places people like to perhaps go for a bit of quiet time.
Yeah.
Norma. Just away from prying eyes, where they can have a proper conversation as a young couple, perhaps. Yeah.
It's certainly a place like that, and even when you're there during the day, I'm sure I'm very biased, but knowing everything that's gone on there and the legendary status it has because of King, there's a vibe there that's different. And there's a bench there where Stephen would sit and come up with some of his stories. And the bench has a plaque there now. But where the bench is located and where the standpipe is, it's all so very unassuming. And to be there at night and to witness something strange or unexplainable, because, I can't say that was a ghost. I can't say that was a creature. I can't say that it wasn't some sort of maybe somebody on drugs or somebody from the unhoused community. I don't know. But it was strange, and it happened in a strange place, and stuff like that keeps happening here. It happens everywhere, but this is the place that I know, and it keeps happening here.
I've once heard Maine, in regards to its supernatural and Fortean history, Norm, described as quietly menacing, because it seems to be a place that has a lot going on. And most people, unless you specifically go out of your way up to the New England area, because it often gets overlooked a lot, despite it having some very big hitting cases over the years, especially in regards to UFOs and cryptids. And I think people sometimes get blinded by Stephen King's celebrity and his body of work, that they don't get past into some of it. And yet, as I said in the introduction, for me, there are some really creepy stories that I've come across and some experiences. I mean, I think we probably, if it's all right with you, we'll get the big one out of the way, I think, as in the most controversial, which is the infamous Allagash incident, which, for me, my first introduction was seeing it on a segment on Unsolved Mysteries many years ago with some of its wonderful recreations and actors.
Yeah. I think that might have been my first experience with it, too.
Sadly, Matthew McConaughey was not working on this particular episode. Obviously, famously appeared in a different, wearing some very strange clothing. But I'm sure he's fine now. 30 years on, he's moved on from being shot in a garage. Do you think it's the most famous UFO case in Maine? Because there are lots of other ones, and I remember listening to Peter Davenport, the wonderful former leader of the UFO Reporting Centre, who's now passed the torch on to his son to carry on collating his amazing body of work in regards to the reports that they've collected. But Allagash, even from that period of me seeing it there, Norma, it seems to have been confirmed, denied, disagreed about, and then half of them said it wasn't true. Then the brothers were saying it is true, and then one said, no, it's definitely not. We only did it for... And it's so murky. I'm not really... I think because it's been controversial and you've had this kind of contradictory history to it, some people just don't seem to give it any credence anymore. And yet, the original incident, before all the ramifications of who said what and whether it's true or not, is a damn creepy one.
It is. It is. And I would agree, it is the most famous story, UFO story from here. It's not the most fascinating case from here, but it is the most famous. And despite all the controversy, the all four, I mean, in my experience, all four of them are very nice individuals. I've only ever talked to some of them briefly. And it's, I rarely give my opinion on stories that I write about in the book anyways. Like I'll come on a podcast and give an opinion, but in my book, I want a reader to decide, what they choose to believe, But with the Allagash case, I think even in the latest book that I wrote about the case, which was UFOs over Maine 10th anniversary edition, where I really did a deep dive into it, I have no problem explaining my bias towards it. I believe the 3 out of the 4 gentlemen now, but I've always believed the case. It's some of the most compelling evidence when Ray Fowler got a hold of these guys and did his due diligence on interviews and hypnosis, and even the background checks, talking to friends and family and co-workers and bosses. Like, he was relentless and he didn't really leave any stone unturned. And when it was all said and done, Fowler presented a very compelling case for alien interaction. So controversial, yes. The most famous, yes. But do I believe it happened? Yeah. When they tell the story, it's actually a pretty small story, but it's creepy, but it's small, it's contained, and it's believable. There's never been these crazy claims. And the only reason we know about the aliens and what they look like and what these guys went through is because of the hypnosis sessions. And every one of them, even the 4th one who claims none of this happened, was saying the same things these guys were during those hypnosis sessions. And to read the transcripts of those sessions is utterly compelling. You could just publish a book of those transcripts and it would be a compelling read. And Fowler put, a narrative and the facts of the story around these transcripts. And it's a fascinating story. And I don't know, I think it's one of the few that I'll go to my grave believing. There's a lot of famous stories, a lot of non-famous stories, but truly fascinating stories that I don't always believe all of them. But just because I don't believe it doesn't mean the story can't be told, So it was a privilege to be another researcher from the state of Maine, like Fowler, to tell tell this story, and I think it's a great one. But yeah, it is, to go full circle. Yes, it's controversial and but fascinating.
How does the area treat it? Because obviously, as we speak, it's going to be 50 years.
Yeah, they don't really talk about it. So many people are aware of it. And there are some things on the big dates, the 30-year, the 40-year, and I'm sure the 50-year. There's typically not necessarily a convention, but there's something that happens, especially up where this all occurred. They'll do a little something. There's on Halloween for a long time. I don't think it's as consistent anymore, but they were running a story or this story at Loring Air Force Base in the visitor center that's up in the area, and telling the story of the Allagash abductions, which was really cool. And so a lot of people know about it, but it's becoming more of an old timer case. It's how people think of Roswell even 20 years ago, because it's such an old case. That's how they're starting to think about the Allagash abduction case, because it was, it's over 40 years old, or it's almost 50 years old now. So it is becoming one of those older, like boomer cases, if you will. So I feel as though I'm kind of done, I guess, writing about the story and researching the story, because I think it's been picked apart as much as possible. It's been picked apart by so many people, and it was picked apart most famously by Ray Fowler, and he did the best job with it, in my opinion. And I was only trying to keep up. And even though I retold the story and I went in depth, I didn't cover as much ground as Fowler did. He wrote an entire fascinating book about the case, and it's utterly compelling from start to finish. And there's literally no stone unturned in his writing of the case. And yeah, so I think it's been picked apart as much as possible. And I stand with the three that say it happened, and that's where I'm at with it.
Yeah, Maine's also, as far as I'm aware, Nomar, got allegedly one of the oldest UFO sightings, which I think is from the early 19th century.
Yeah.
Which is one of those where we've got to remember the period where the witness was a woman. Mm-hmm. And I've seen some reports in the 19th century who basically said, well, she could have been a little confused internally about what she saw. But this woman was quite an intelligent, well-read, articulate lady, and she was absolutely cast iron in the fact that what she saw, we know it couldn't have been a weather balloon because it was 1808.
Yeah. She didn't know what to make of it. She wasn't even speculating that it was extraterrestrial in nature. I don't think that even crossed her mind in the sense that how we think about it now. I think she thought it was an unusual celestial space sort of thing that was happening. She didn't know what it was, though, and she was just documenting it as anybody else would, and this was a woman who got married later in life, which wasn't really a thing in during that time frame. So I think she was seen a little bit as a spinster, even though she was like in her 30s.
Yes.
But she was, helped out at the schools. But she kept a diary, and she wrote down a lot of stuff, that happened in her life. And she wrote about other celestial things that she would see, but they were things that were quite obviously, Orion's belt or, things like that. So when she's going to bed one night and she's, basically sitting on her bed and happens to look out the window, or this light outside catches her eye, and she goes to the window to look at it, she's like, wow, that's new, that's interesting. And so she goes to her diary and she writes it down, but it's not even a full paragraph. It's just, I was sitting, I saw this thing, kind of jumped around in the sky, and that's it. And then, to scour the rest of her diary, there's no other entries like that. She wasn't prone to fanciful writing like that. It was more so like a personal diary, a journal. And it had a lot of her hopes and fears. And, and when she finally got married, she actually stopped writing in it. So I guess she was documenting this single portion of her life, and, for whatever reason, after getting married, she'd stop. But, people have been up and down that diary, and I think it's over 600 pages. She kept it for quite a while. And there's nothing else in there that indicates anything that. So I think she saw a genuine phenomena of some sort and simply documented it like I hope any of us would.
I suppose that is something that gives more credence to her experience as well, as you say, that this diary wasn't full of strange stories and weird events. It wasn't a work of fiction or exaggeration. It was a pretty mundane, well, not mundane. I suppose it was quite, as I say, because she had the wit and intelligence about her that perhaps wasn't perceived that a spinster of that era allegedly should have. She was very sort of well put together intellectually, and she was quite aware of the world around her and found joy in all kinds of wonderful things. And it's a wonderful snapshot of early 19th century Americana, is it not?
Absolutely. And, you know, you say mundane, but kind of took it back a little bit. But that's kind of how her language was, you know, in describing it. She like, oh, this happened. And it was enough for her to write it down, you know, so that means it was significant enough. But she explained it in very, you know, common, regular language. She wasn't even trying to embellish in the writing of it. You know, it was just, here's a thing I saw and it was weird, so I'm going to document it type of thing.
There have been, as we said, regardless of the state's most notorious cases, there have been far more substantial or interesting UFO cases that have occurred over Maine, primarily because it is a coastal region and there is often a connection with that. And obviously you've got some bases around there. You've got some sort of former and current military operations, I believe, out there, as you would do as a coastal state. What for you is one of those that you think more eyes should be on, more people need to be aware of? Because, as I say often, the big case, regardless of its power, does tend to draw everybody's attention. Whereas obviously reading your body of work, and as you mentioned, your books on this, and you've spoken to an experience as well from the state, and I believe that was Granite Skies, the book that you focused on that particular experience there. Which is the one that really you think deserves to be Maine's front and centre case, Norma, rather than Allagash all the time?
Yeah, that's a really good question. There's a couple that come to mind, but the one that jumps to the top of the list was a curious incident that happened in the mid 1960s. 65, 67, I don't have the information in front of me right now, but around that time frame. And it happened at a school in the middle of the day. You know, so this will be reminiscent of some other, you know, school type incidents that we're all aware of. But it was early during class, about 9 o'clock in the morning or so. And there's a teacher and she's giving a lesson. And there's a young student. These are all 10, 11, 12-year-olds. And there's this young student in the back. And he's like kind of, you know, paying attention and doing his thing. But he starts to hear this beeping sound coming from outside. And he's like, he kind of stops what he's doing and starts to ignore the teacher. And he's looking out the window and he's thinking, you know, like, what the hell is this thing? His name's Paul, by the way. And he's thinking, you know, like, what is this thing? And he starts to see like this black dot in the sky. And, you know, and he's like, what is that? So he gets up and runs to the window. And the teacher's like, excuse me, like, what are you doing? And he basically ignores her and he goes to the window and he gasps. And so all the other kids, they get up and they run to the window and now they're all there. And the teacher's like behind them, like, what are you doing? And so everybody starts to hear the beeping now. And this little black dot in the sky is getting bigger and bigger. And it turns out that something's getting closer. And as this thing gets really close, all the children see this oval silver shaped craft, and on the bottom is like, it has like this black bottom, and that I assume is the black dot that they were seeing. And it had this little antenna thing sticking out the front of it, and there was a light on top of it, and every time the light pulsed they were hearing the beeping sound. And this thing got so close that it flew by the windows of the school on the second floor where they were looking out the window and watching this thing. And it flew by and was descending further, and it looked like it landed behind somebody's house. So all the kids are freaking out. The teacher sees it, you know, like they don't know what to do. So she goes and gets the principal. And the principal is kind of losing his mind. He's like, what? That's cool. Like he can't believe all the kids saw it and the teacher saw it. So he gets it in his mind that he needs to sequester all the kids, keep them separate, keep them not talking to each other. And he wants to interview each one of them. So he does. He starts doing that, and he starts hearing the same story over and over again, basically what I just told you. And so he, like halfway through, he calls the local newspaper, and he says, hey, has anyone called in to report any sort of weird sightings in the sky, like UFO stuff? And the reporter goes, yeah. Somebody in the next town over, he was a railroad worker, and he was outside on the tracks, and he kept hearing this beeping sound, and he looked up, and he would see this, he called it like the bottom of a teacup go by. And every time it was going by, it was getting bigger. And so he saw it 5 or 6, 7 times. Like, he'd hear the beeping sound, he'd look up, he'd see the thing, and it had gotten bigger. And he's like, what is that? So he reported, this sighting. So the reporter goes, can I come down and talk to some of the kids? And the principal said, yeah. So once the reporter gets there, the principal and him start sequestering the children again, and they keep telling the same story. And then the reporter asks them to draw what they saw. And they all drew something oval. They colored the top kind of white, and they left the bottom like green for the chalkboard, to indicate the black. And they drew the antenna and the little light on top. And the reporter was taking pictures of the kids in front of their chalkboard drawing, and decided to publish the story the next day in the paper. And then it went nowhere. I only learned about this story 2 years ago, and it happened in the mid-'60s. And we're talking numerous eyewitnesses, children and adults, at a school during the day. This is a daylight close-up sighting, but I don't know what happened to it. Getting the actual copy or the photocopy of the newspaper that this was printed in, there was another story printed right next to it about meteors and all the meteor sightings that were happening. And I'm wondering if that was done on purpose, and maybe folks reading that were like, oh, that's probably just what the kids saw. Although that makes no sense with what I just told you. But, somebody casually reading, one story and then going to the next, say, oh, that's what the kids saw. Kids are idiots. What, I don't know what the people were thinking, but, the police were never called. So that story happened, and it literally went nowhere and just died, for years and years and years. And I think I'm the first one to retell that story some, 50 years later. But I think that should be in the discussion of pretty iconic cases from the state, and it's rarely talked about, but it's a fascinating one to me.
It is as well. When you think, I can think of two very famous, well, three actually, as I've said that, 3 extremely famous school cases. You've got Bestall in Australia, which happened around the same time, mid-'60s. I think that was 66, I think it was.
I think so.
Then you got Broadhaven here in Wales in 77. And then obviously probably the most famous one was the Ariel School in the 90s.
Yeah.
And I think Preston Dennett, the UFO researchers, got a whole book based on school sightings and stuff. And often for me, Norma, as you joked about there, kids are stupid and all that. There often seems to be, in most of these cases, there is a teacher who clearly knows his children very well, or their children very well, and decides that they're going to do a proper forensic examination of this. They're going to separate the kids, they're going to ask them to draw it, they're going to ask them to write it down. I mean, Broadhaven was dismissed as the children not knowing what a council recycling van was, I think. Westall is extremely controversial, and I think there's more things to come out with that. And Ariel is the same, that people have dismissed it.
Yeah.
Primarily, you've got one of the witnesses who is now very similar to Allagash, gone on and said, no, none of it happened. Unfortunately for him, he seems to not know how the internet works. And so when he started saying, oh, they're all idiots and all this, everybody went, hang on a minute, mate. Here's this interview from 15 years ago when you're telling us all about it.
Mm-hmm.
Which is it to be? And it's really good, I think, that you've got educators all around the world who don't try and dismiss this, who don't try and poo-poo what the children are telling them.
Yeah.
And when you deal with it immediately, Nomar, there isn't that chance to create a false narrative. And even if you did, the way the memory works and people, they don't get the story straight, or they draw different things. And yet you will often see in some of these cases like Broadhaven, Westall, Ariel, kids draw the same thing, but they're all doing it within an hour of the incident. So how on earth could that possibly be a trick or a coming together of children trying to prank their teachers for a laugh?
Yeah, like not giving the children the respect of their intelligence. You know, when something like this happens, I'm really proud of the principal's actions in this Maine case, you know, to sequester them and to not immediately dismiss it, but to find it fascinating and that they all saw it at the same time. He, you know, had the wherewithal, and I think that's great, you know, that he was able to do all that and to give the children the respect and the courtesy of you know, not dismissing them, to believe them and to want to know more and to ask engaging questions. So the children want to tell their story. All of them were very excited to share what happened, and they weren't made to feel like what they saw was incorrect or, you know, that they were making it up. They weren't treated that way. And I think that's fascinating. And to have that story kind of die after such a great start to the case, you know, is fascinating to me. And, you know, it's too bad, but it's fascinating. Like, how did that happen? You know, like, you know, so I think we were caught up in other people dismissing the case, unfortunately, and you know, and it just didn't go anywhere. So if I can help spread that story, you know, I'm going to do it every time I can. So I'm so glad you asked about it.
Well, and I think what we've noticed over the last few years is that there are some of these historical cases, Nomar, where people have hidden away because of the ramifications at the time. And I would not be surprised that there was not some kind of deliberate attempt to explain it away with a meteor, because you see that a lot. I mean, and it's the mid-60s. You know, Project Blue Book's pulling the strings left, right and centre all over the place. And it's not far away from Hynek losing his shit over swamp gas.
Right.
So we're in that area where, and we know, looking at the body of evidence, that this was a constant theme, that the authorities would always try and dismiss these with the most ludicrous natural explanations. Because, like you say, I mean, I've seen a meteor. Doesn't look anything like a silver and black disc with a flashing light on the top. It looks like a streaking ball of fire.
Yeah. And it's quite obviously it's outside of our atmosphere. You know what I mean? As opposed to something going by a window, you know?
Yes. Yeah. And then landing behind somebody's house. Because if a comet, if, you know, a comet or a meteor landed behind somebody's house, we'd all know about it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And you know, I did my due diligence in looking at UFO sightings around that area. You know, before and after. You know, I was looking on Davenport's site and obviously MUFON as well, to see if there was anything reported around that time. And there are a few reports, but not in that area and not described that way. You know, so it seemed to be like the singular, really crazy event.
Yes, I mean, I'm chuckling because I obviously have a lot of newsfeed emails that I get. So I get about 6 or 7 a day, Nomar, where it basically collates a series of weird Fortean stories in a variety of subjects.
I get a few myself.
And the other day I got one of my UFO updates, and that featured an article about Maine being such a hotspot for UFO sightings.
I think I got that one.
But the theory was they were thinking, is it the lobster that's bringing them to Maine? Are aliens into shellfish?
Oh, jeez. And, you know, and that's kind of the tongue-in-cheek stuff that I'm tired of, you know, and so I'm glad that it's taken a bit more seriously as of late, you know, especially since 2017 when the big article came out. The tongue-in-cheek stuff can get kind of old, and I'll see emails like that or stories written like that. I'm like, okay, well, all right.
Well, the tide is turning slowly.
Very slowly, but it is turning.
Yeah, they're not using the term tinfoil hat wearing as much these days, thankfully.
You're right, but, you know, with the lobster thing, it's just another way to say that, you know.
Yes.
So,
yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I suppose as well, Norma, when you're diving into the history of Maine and the legends and lore, because obviously it goes back a lot, has it been hard to kind of separate what some of the Algonquin myths and legends are? Or have you seen any of their sort of beliefs? Because obviously they've got some very interesting stories. I mean, they've got a whole belief in a race of little people, and there are numerous places around there which have stories of other tribes of little people, which is something that is quite prevalent across Native American and First Nation tribes that along with Bigfoot, they've also got small hairy people all over the place, it would seem, as well. But they also had a version of what we would consider Bigfoot. And obviously, as we mentioned earlier, Michelle wrote a whole book about people. Whilst Maine is not perhaps a hot spot, you're smack next to Canada, which has got stories all over the place, regardless of which province in north of the border is for you guys. So, but they had those tales of a tall, hairy creature. This strange creature that they describe round there, which I believe is pronounced Kiwakwa. When I've looked at it, and obviously when I read, I think it was David Weatherly's book a few years ago, when he was looking at some of the cryptids of the Pine Tree State, he mentioned this, and the description, I think, as for anybody who's a lover of cryptids, it's one of those tribal stories that you, as soon as you read it, you go, aha, this just sounds like Bigfoot or Sasquatch to me.
Yeah. A lot of the indigenous lore of this state does have modern day stories associated with them. People continue to encounter things that indigenous lore have spoken about for quite literally thousands of years. I think we have some history here that goes like 11,000 years back for some of the tribes, which is insane. And, it's an insane time frame to think about, and for modern people to still be encountering some of these things, really lends to the credibility of these indigenous stories, and from Katahdin, where a lot of these stories take place, which is a mountain in Maine, and it's the highest peak in Maine. A lot of strangeness has gone on in that area, and indigenous tribes would speak of the Pamula cryptid, which was this huge thing with like wings and talons, but was also kind of humanoid and spoke and could speak whatever language to the person that they were talking to, which is really interesting. So a lot of white settlers claim to have run into this creature while on Katahdin, while exploring Katahdin, and going up to the highest areas of Katahdin against indigenous advice, that's very much a white person thing to do. And so they'd go up there and experience, some of this lore, which is really fascinating, that it continued to be talked about.
Well, it seems to have all manner of strange cryptids there. Is there one that's called something the Screecher, which is one of these strange monstrosities that we find in certain states that just doesn't seem to fit anywhere else. It's a unique one. It
really is. It's a really unique one, where people that have seen this thing called the Basin Screecher, which its home is supposedly in this basin of this small town in Maine, people who have seen it describe it as looking kind of like an old man, an old naked man with wings. So such a weird description of something. And there's even been police activity surrounding this cryptid, where police have witnessed it. Police have investigated stories from witnesses having seen this thing. And there's even a story of maybe this thing murdering some people, which you don't hear about often in cryptid cases, where they're hurting people and to the point of killing them. But this Basin Screecher has been around for quite some time, and as you can tell by the name, most people hear it rather than see it. But it's got this really blood curdling scream. Some people have described it as a cross between a coyote and a woman screaming. And screaming like bloody murder, from what witnesses have said, it's quite the thing to hear. And to actually hear that and then follow it up with a visual sighting of what looks like a naked old man with wings is truly, it's diabolical. It's crazy. But there's modern encounters with this thing. And a policeman claimed to have spotted this creature at one point. And in spotting this creature, it's kind of part of a longer story, but when his portion of it, when he saw this creature, he heard it first and then he saw it, and he claimed to have actually discharged his weapon at it. He knew in his mind that he hit this thing, and it just screeched and flew off, and he couldn't believe what happened. Now, the case of where this thing might have hurt some people, it was 2 teenage girls, and they had come up here for the summer with their family, and they were staying in this area, and they had met some boys, and the boys told them about this bonfire down in the basin, and all these other kids were going to be there, and they thought that would be fun for them to do. So they're in their car, and they're driving these little dirt back roads in Maine to try to find where this fire pit was, and they got lost. So at one point they got out of the car and they started hearing the screeching, and they're like, what the hell is that? And they were seeing things kind of dart around above them, and they were getting pretty scared, and they screamed at one point when they saw it. And so the kids that were having the bonfire, heard the screech from the screecher and also heard the screams from the girls. And so a lot of them went out to search for the girls to try to help them, to find them and make sure they're okay. And when it was all said and done, what they came across were body parts and shredded skin, and some of them were in the trees, and police were called. And so that's how the story goes. But when you do the research, yes. Was there a police report? Was there anything? And even talking to the police, they're like, we don't have anything that would indicate something like this happened. So then I'm starting to look into, are there just 2 missing teenage girls that were from out of state and had come to Maine and went missing? And I couldn't find anything, so something like that, you probably need to chalk up to lore. Maybe it's a bit of exaggerated storytelling, something like that. But this is one of the examples where the story should still be told. There's, even if some of bits and pieces of the story isn't true, I still think it demands for these stories to be out there. A, for a matter of historical record, and B, to, lore for these stories to continue to be told. So I still think it has a place, even though it's tough to find any factual information about it.
Yeah, well, I think every state's got one of those, haven't they? Be it Bloody Mary, or you've got the Goatman, you've even allegedly got one incident of somebody claiming to have run into a Goatman in Maine. But it's one of those where it just happened once, whereas you've got 2 places in other states that are like, well, this is the real Goatman Bridge. No, this is our Goatman Bridge. And then you have this Goatman battle. But they're the same. When you dive into the stories, there's quite a terrible backstory. The Texas one especially is awful.
Yeah.
And then the other one, you've essentially got this bridge where kids have met their doom, because for some reason people forget that it's actually a functioning train line. And it's not big enough to get off the bridge. You've got 2 choices. You either get run over by the train, or you hang on and hope to God you can keep grip.
Right. And our Goatman story is much more simple, and it comes across more believable, in my opinion. And there's also some supernatural elements to it as well. Not just the ghost man, but there's another part of the story that's a little supernatural that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but it's this really unassuming story about this Mainer who's going to work, and he's probably a logger or something, but they don't get into details. And he's driving on one of these roads in the Cherryfield, Maine area, which is rural and remote. And he had gotten gas the day before, something like that. And so he had a full tank of gas, and all of a sudden his truck stops running. And he looks at the gas tank, and he's on empty, and he's like, what the hell? So he, puts it in park, jumps out, and he's like, I must have a gas leak. Like, this sucks. So he gets under the truck, and he's looking around, and he starts to get this feeling that somebody is watching him. So he looks, and he sees these 2 pretty large hooved feet standing fairly close to him. Close to the truck. I mean, it's fairly, but probably, might have been 20 yards away or something. So he crawls out from beneath the truck, stands up, and what he's looking at is this 6 foot tall humanoid looking creature, and it's got the head of a goat, and it's wearing a plaid flannel shirt.
Ah.
And, you know, there are some stories throughout Americana where some of these cryptids have been sighted with plaid shirts or jeans, and it is kind of representative of what, you know, the working class people might be wearing in these areas where these things are spotted, which has a different psychological connotation to it. But this gentleman, with, you know, seeing this goat man thing, he's looking at it and it's looking at him, and he gets a very evil sense from it. And in his mind, it's almost saying, like, come follow me. And it almost smiles, in his opinion, as much as a goat can smile.
Yes.
This weird face smiles at him, turns around and walks back into the woods. And in his mind, it was follow me. And he was like, that's the last thing I'm going to do. So he jumps back into the truck. And I think out of muscle memory, he just goes to start up the truck to get the hell out of there. And it starts. And he looks down and he's got a full tank of gas again. So this is where that other supernatural, otherworldly part comes to it. You know, was this creature doing some sort of Jedi mind trick on this guy,
Yes.
you know, to get him stopped and to, like, hey, come see me. Cause it's a remote road. I'm sure Goatman doesn't get too many people out there. He's like, a person.
Let's play some fun.
Yeah. Let's have some fun. So, you know, now years later, because this was reported to happen in the 1950s. There isn't a specific date, but this was reported to happen in the, I think, early 1950s. And fast forward, I think, about 25 years or so, and there's another person in a different part of the state, but not too far from Cherryfield. I think we're still in the same county, which is Hancock County. And this person was walking in the woods, and they were younger at the time. I think they were late teens, maybe early 20s, and they were walking in the woods, a place they've gone a million times, and they started to hear a flute type sound. And they thought it was interesting. Like, where's that coming from? I'm going to follow it.
No.
So they can, you're right. So they continue to, you know, walk and try to follow the sound, and it would get louder, and then it would get quieter, get louder, you know, and it was kind of playing with them. And they finally stopped and thought, like, oh, I might be, something might be luring me to not a good thing. They started to get a bad feeling. And then that made me think about the Greek god Pan,
yes,
who was, you know, a goat-like thing with a flute. And to have this goat-like thing with a flute, and then the goat man thing happened, you know, 25 years earlier, I'm like, what is happening here? But when I was retelling the story in one of my books, I had to put all of those things together, because when you put them all together, it's fascinating, like, to think about it all. So the Goatman story from Maine is very unassuming, and there's not a whole lot to the encounter, because it's the, you know, everything about it is what I just told you, and it's got that funny, weird, otherworldly part to it with the gas tank. But when you add it together with the high strangeness from the state, it's a story that has to get told, in my opinion. I don't know the legitimacy of it. I really want to believe it. But that's what I really like about some of these stories. Regardless of my belief, I feel like they need to be told. I need to put it in a book or a documentary or a podcast or something, so somebody else can hear the story, and hopefully it conjures memories or fascination or something in them as well, just to keep that story going. And maybe after they hear it and they go home for Thanksgiving, they tell their folks, hey, I heard this really strange story. And you know, and they tell their folks, and, you know, and it kind of gets passed on. And you know, that's a big part of why I love telling these stories. The high strangeness of it, the fascinating parts of it, you know, just begs to be retold over and over again.
Well, that is something that does strike me when I look at some of these cases, because sometimes you can have very normal situations, such as that. It's just a guy running out of gas for no reason. And there's one particular case where a young boy goes hiking with friends, and he disappears. He gets lost, and I think he disappeared for 12 days, and incredibly he manages to survive. But when he's telling everybody what happened to him, he has this strange thing that happens to him on the second day where he believes to have seen his friend Henry, I think he's called.
Yeah.
Like sort of obscured mostly by a tree stump, so he can only see his head or something. But then he notices, well, he seems to be describing a very far away section of the clan that have just turned up in the middle of this wood, because he seems to describe these tall figures wearing white robes and you can't see their heads, but they seem to all have blazing eyes. And then he sees a vision of his father in a car, and so he goes down to find them and nothing's there.
The second day, yeah. Yeah, and to have that sighting just on the second day, because this was a kid. He was, 9, 10, 11 years old. His name was Don Fendler, and he wrote a famous book about it, or actually orally told somebody who wrote the famous book about it, called Lost on a Mountain in Maine. It just came out as a movie last year or 2 years ago. Fascinating story. You should check out the movie. It's really well done. And I was hoping they were going to tell this portion of it. They do get a little weird with it, but they don't tell this portion of the story, which is too bad. But yeah, on his second day, so he's gone for 12 days and, gets to a point where he's delirious. He hasn't eaten very much, berries and things like that. And he's drinking river water or pond water and, things like that. But to have what a lot of people think was a hallucination on the second day doesn't make a whole lot of sense in the grand scheme of his being lost story. Maybe on the 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th day, sure. But the second day is interesting. And it could have been, maybe it was something he ate. If we are going to go with he hallucinated this, maybe he ate the wrong kind of berry, or maybe he was exhausted from the heat, but it was a very specific sighting that I really never heard before, where, like you were saying, it was these 4 hugely tall, he described them as male things in these white robes. They had these blazing eyes, but he couldn't really see their facial features. And they were all pointing in front of them at his friend Henry, who had been with them but didn't get lost. But they were all pointing at Henry, and he was scared for Henry. So he was calling out to him like, hey, watch out. And like you were saying, when he got up to go over there, those things weren't there anymore. But when he was retelling this story after he got rescued, even the person he was telling the story to that was writing everything down to make this book, he's like, are you sure this is what you saw? These might be ramblings of somebody who might have been through the throes of exhaustion or whatever. And he's like, no, this happened. I saw this. For him to be so adamant 40 years on is wild. He never took it back. He how the story is told is what he tells people, or what he told people. He's since passed away. But yeah, fascinating story.
It is peculiar, as you say, because it's very easy to kind of say, as you speculate there, Norma, that he could have eaten the wrong berry, could have licked the wrong mushroom.
Yeah.
We know that there are certain natural things out there that can cause hallucinations and nausea and all kinds of strange things.
Sure.
But then when you look at that whole case, you have to think that this kid still had the wherewithal to carry on surviving for another 10 days and had the intelligence and the strength to sensibly follow the river which brought him back towards civilization. And you would suggest that, as you mentioned there, that's the kind of delusion or hallucination you would expect somebody after 10 days of living on nuts and berries and whatever they could. I mean, by that point, you're probably eating anything. You're probably pretending you're a cow and chowing down on some grass or leaves or wherever you can, because you'll be starving. Right. And yet he still had the common sense to do the right thing. And you would suggest that surely the longer he was out there scraping by, that's when it would have kicked in. And if it had kicked in there, he wouldn't have had the intelligence to carry on doing what he did. His behaviour seems extremely rational for both a young person and also the circumstances he found in. Why would he create such a ludicrous faraway tale?
Yeah. And when he saw his friend Henry, because that's who he saw first, he didn't see these things first. And when he first saw Henry, his buddy, he's like, oh, I'm saved. They found me. And he even, I don't know if he has a vision or what was happening, but like you were saying, he sees his father driving up on the mountain in his car and he's like, oh, my dad's here. Excellent. And then he sees this guy on a horse, like going by at one point. And then once all that's done, he sees these, 4 tall human beings in the white robes pointing at his friend Henry, and so strange. But like you were saying, he has the wherewithal, and he really kind of did save himself. I'm glad rescuers were up there to like get him, but he got himself down as far as he could so rescuers could find him. He did that himself. And and the way he tells the story, I mean, this is a kid who credits the Boy Scouts for saving his life, for, giving him the skills, and to be adamant on what he saw. It's truly fascinating to me now. But like we've speculated, could he have hallucinated it? Absolutely. Could he have eaten something? Absolutely. But for him to be so adamant and into his adulthood, and he was going around the country telling his story, because his book was so big, he was going around the country telling his story, to have it be that consistent and to like, this is what happened. It's pretty fascinating. Yeah.
It's remarkable because there are numerous cases from the US, and I'm sure there's other ones in other countries, Nomar, where you've got children who get lost and somehow they survive. Because you've got to be really careful, with the greatest respect, there are certain states that a young child wandering around the woods lost is a perfect morsel for a certain predator or two out there. Regardless of even diving into the world of cryptids, you've got grizzlies, black bears, brown bears, you've got bobcats, you've got mystery black panthers wandering around. That's even before you even consider things like Bigfoot and stuff. And we had that incredible case the other year of that kid who claimed a bear had saved him and fetched him berries, and everybody went, oh well, that's all right. And we're like, what which bear bears might do that, but they probably won't. If they come across a kid in winter, they're not going to go, oh, here's and I think he mentioned it talking to him. I mean, hang on. What's going on here? And the other strange one that's jumped into my mind is that kid who got lost and ended up in a cave with something that looked like his grandma, but it wasn't his grandma. And then she asked him to poo on a piece of paper. Like, what?
So weird. So, and the kid was what, 2-3 years old? And how do you come up with that story when you're that age? That's wild to me.
Yeah. And he said, it looked like my grandma, but I knew it wasn't her. It just didn't seem right. And
he called her the other grandma.
Yeah. So, it's... I've given myself the chills there, Norman.
You were talking about the state of Maine being like quietly menacing. And I have a very small story that happened to me, but I think really encapsulates that sentiment. So I was in our national park, which is Acadia National Park, and I was riding my bicycle, and I was in a remote area. I mean, a lot of it's, kind of remote, but I'm on what's called the carriage roads, and they kind of go on forever. I think it's 45 miles of, intertwined trails of all this stuff. And I'm in this area and I'm the only one there. It's the height of summer, but I was the only one there because typically it's crawling with people. There's tons of people just, hiking these trails and everything and riding bikes and stuff. And, but I had been by myself for a good like half hour, not seeing anybody else. And it was, the middle of the day. And I'm coming up on this big bend in the road, and it's a dirt road. It's called the carriage roads, and quite literally they were used as carriage roads, with a horse and carriage and all that stuff. And I'm coming up on this bend, and I start to get this really ominous feeling. I'm like, what the hell? Why am I feeling this? So I stop riding my bike. And I'm just sitting there now. So I've stopped, and I can't see around the bend, obviously, but in my mind's eye, I'm like, there's something beyond the bend. And if I get to it, I'm going to see it, and it's not good. I didn't know what that really entailed. And I'm typically not scared like that very often. So I started to pedal a little bit further because I'm like, you're being foolish. Just keep going. And the feeling was really starting to scare me. So I stopped, and I'm like probably halfway going around this bend. And again, in my mind's eye, I'm picturing, and I don't know if I'm picturing this because of all the stuff I'm into or something was projecting itself into my mind, but I saw this tall hairy creature standing in the middle of the road. And I was going to run into it if I kept riding my bike. And it seemed very menacing, like it wasn't going to be a pleasant experience if I continued to go. So I was like, that's enough. That's enough for me. So I stopped my bike, turned it around, and I went home. And I remember when I got back home, I texted my girlfriend about, hey, this happened. I don't know what it means, but here's what I thought. And she's very supportive and, holds some similar belief and was like, well, I'm glad you didn't keep going. I'm like, me too. But I kind of wish I did at the same time, but I had the self-preservation thing. And that's kind of an annoyance when you're like a researcher and an author and you have your own experience. It's annoying because you want to be unbiased and you want to go to the extreme and investigate it as much as you can. But in that instance, I said no. And I turned around. But there's been other instances where I've had kind of a creepy encounter and I ran towards it, and everything was fine. But again, I didn't get that, menacing sense in those other ones like I did in this one. So I stand behind turning around because, I'm human and I'm entitled to have human reactions, and that's okay. And if I don't get the cool story, oh, well, there'll be another one. And whether it's mine or not, that's fine,
Absolutely. And I think sometimes you've got to go with that gut feeling. And I think, as you say there, Norman, it's frustrating for us sometimes that we find ourselves in these situations that normally, as you say, we run towards them. We want to embrace them. We want the experience, or we'll speak to people that have had hair-raising encounters of a variety of situations. And yet occasionally you'll come across something like that and you just go, nope, not today.
Nope. It's rare. But, there was another situation I had. I was driving at night. It wasn't that late, though. It was like before 7 p.m., but it was dark. It's Maine in the winter, and it was, it gets dark at like 4 p.m. here. And so I was driving on a back road, and up ahead on the left-hand side of the road, I saw this thing standing on the side of the road. And it looked like this 5 or 6 foot tall humanoid thing made of sticks. And it was all intertwined sticks making up its legs and arms and head. And it didn't have antlers, but it had 2 sticks sticking straight up from its head. And it was inky black, and my lights shined off it like it was oil. It was like oily black. And it kind of looked like the Blair Witch stick figures, but full size, or for people that don't know that, Groot from Guardians of the Galaxy, kind of like that, I guess. But 5 or 6 feet tall. And as I'm coming up on it, there's a ditch on either side of the road. And I saw it take this exaggerated step over the ditch and walk into the woods. So I'm seeing this. And again, it's not that late. And it's all happening within like 3 or 5 seconds. I'm going like 45 miles an hour. And I see this thing. And I'm like, what the hell is that? And then I come up on the area really quick where it had walked into the woods. So it's a back road. There's no place to pull over. So I just throw the car and park in the middle of the road. Yeah. I don't get out, but I roll down the window to see if I can hear it crunching in the snow walking in the woods. But I don't hear anything. And I'm like, did I see that? I'm pretty sure I saw that. And then all of a sudden I'm hit with this awful stench. And it's like sulfur or rotting meat or a combination of the two. And I've heard of those interactions with a Bigfoot, that they're really stinky. Yeah. You also hear of, sulfur smells with like demonic type stories. But I've never experienced it myself. And it was so bad that I had to have all 4 windows rolled down for the rest of my ride home to get the smell out of the car. So that was crazy thing to see and then to experience the smell. So when I got home, I wrote everything down. I emailed it to a buddy just so it was out there for somebody. And then I started doing research about incidents in this specific area. And this isn't a place that's very far away from where I lived at the time. And I guess I never really thought to research that area before because I hadn't. But I ended up finding a really peculiar UFO story from that area about 30 years prior. I think it was in the 90s. And this guy was given a ride home to these two girls, and, you know, they were all friends. And while they were driving, they saw this UFO hovering over the water. And they're watching it, and almost like when they acknowledged seeing it, this thing came over the road, just at like treetop level, but it was pacing them as it drove. And they're like, wow, this is crazy. And they're watching this thing. But one of the girls really has to get home, so they can't really like stop or anything. So they finally get to the girl's place. The UFO is still with them. So the girl gets out, and she just steps back and is looking at this thing because it's pretty basically like right over the car, maybe, 50 feet above the car. And so the other two have to get out and look at it too. So he pulls off, they all get out, and he actually walks underneath it. And there's light emanating from it, but it's not shining anywhere. Like, it's hard to explain, but there's no light being shined on the ground or anything, but it's emanating light. And so he sticks his arm up to see if he can, if it like lights up his arm, but the light's not even hitting his arm. He's like, what? It just didn't make sense. And so he's underneath it, and he's looking right up in the center of it. And he said he can kind of see some weird like piping or something, but it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And the girls were telling him like, hey, get away from it. And so he finally kind of relented and was starting to walk back towards the vehicle. And almost as if the UFO got bored of them, it ascended and then went back over the water and then eventually like took off. And that all happened in a matter of seconds. But interesting, for me to see this thing. And, there was another kind of crazy encounter that happened right in that stretch of road, 30 years prior. And who knows all the other strange things that have happened on that stretch of road that haven't been reported, so it's fascinating to think about. And I always think about it when I drive through that area.
Absolutely. I'm not surprised you do, Norman. Not surprised you do. There's one last thing I'd like to touch on before I let you leave, if that's all right. And I suppose this is one of the things that might surprise people who don't know much about Maine and its strangeness or cryptids in general. For me, one of the creepiest Dogman stories I've ever heard is from Maine, which is this couple, Eric and Shelley Martin. And I think it's in Linda Godfrey's I Know Where I Saw book. Is Dogman a big thing in Maine? Because I think most people, if you say Dogman, they say straight away Michigan, Wisconsin. They wouldn't say Maine. But the Martin story for me, firstly, they were quite happy to give their real names. They were quite happy to say where they lived. Linda
even published the address in the book, which was wild to me.
Yeah. It's a crazy story. For anybody who doesn't know much about it, Nomar, would you just give us a brief synopsis of it, please?
Sure. So, fascinating story. The most famous Dogman story from our state. But there are a lot of others, and I have written about those, but this is by far one of the most compelling and definitely the most famous. And that's because of Linda. And then the Sci-Fi Channel picked up their story as well.
Yes.
And ran a segment on it. But Eric and Shelley Martin, Eric had gotten hurt at work and it disabled him. And to the point where they needed to leave the residence they were living in. They didn't have enough room and they wanted to move someplace else that was easier for Eric to get around. So they rented this farmhouse, which came with a lot of land in the Palmyra, Maine area. And as soon as they moved in, things got weird. They were unpacking stuff on their first night. And, it was getting late as they were unpacking stuff. And Eric at one point looked out the window and he saw all these balls of light in the woods at the tree line. And he's like, what the hell is that? And he had his adult son there and his adult daughter and his daughter's boyfriend and the wife, and his wife, Shelley, they all saw it. And so he asked the two boys if they would go out down there and see what the hell it is. He was worried that it might be poachers. And maybe he was seeing their flashlights. So the boys go down there and they go to check it out. And there's not even a path or anything where these lights were seen. They're like, I don't know what it was, but I don't think it's poachers because there's no place for them to really walk, easily the way these lights would indicate, So like, well, that was strange. But as time went on, they got unpacked. They started to get settled into the house, and they started having a routine of drinking coffee at night, Eric and Shelley. And Shelley had this big heavy duty flashlight, and she liked to shine it around the property to look at animals, the skunks and whatever else we got. And there's this man-made pond that's kind of in back of the house, but like in front of the porch, and that, they would see deer and stuff drink from it. And so they're out there one night and they're seeing some eye shine by the pond. And so something's there drinking. And so Shelley turns on her flashlight because she's thinking it's a deer or something. And when she turns on the flashlight, it's not a deer. They don't know what the hell it is, but they're seeing like this large creature drinking from the pond. And when the light shines on him, it doesn't like the light on him, and it immediately stands up, and it stands up bipedally. And they see that it's got this big chest and 2 arms and 2 legs and the head of what looks like a wolf or a dog. Like it's got a snout and it's got these 2 ears standing straight up, and it's got this little tail behind him, and it's got this short brown fur. And they're like, what the hell is that? And then all of a sudden, 2 more stand up beside it, just as tall. And there's a shed nearby. And Eric said it was as tall as the shed. And the shed's about 7 feet tall. And so now Shelley is shining the flashlight at all 3 of them, because they're trying to get a look at these things, and they don't like the light. So they scamper off and they run to the side of the house, and they're like, oh no. Now they're gone. Like, where did they go? And what are these things? So they immediately go back inside, and Shelley's like, call the cops. So Eric does. He calls the cops, and the cops act like maybe they've heard of this before, because they're like, hey, we're not coming out, but we recommend locking your door and staying inside. And Eric's like, what the hell? Oh, maybe you could call the game wardens. Maybe they'll help you. And he's like, okay, so he gets off the phone with the cops. They're not coming. So he calls the game wardens, and they say something very similar. Thanks for letting us know. We're not coming out, but lock your door, stay inside. And Eric's like, what the hell? So he gets off the phone with them, tells Shelley what's going on, and he goes, I want to go get my guns. Shelley didn't like guns, and so she made him keep them out in the shed. Well, that's where the Dogmen were. And he has trouble getting around. But he wants to go get at least 1 gun. Yeah. So Shelley's like, don't do this. And he's like, I got to. And Shelley decides to go upstairs to be with the adult daughter who's spending the night. And he steps outside. So now he's on the porch, and it's pitch black, and he can't see anything. And he starts to go down the stairs, and all of a sudden this bright light turns on and is shining on him. He's like, whoa, what? Oh, it's the motion sensor light that's on the shed. He's like, oh, thank God. Okay. These things don't like light. So as long as this light stays on, I'll be good. Boom, the light goes off. And he's like, oh no. So he's waving his hands, trying to get the light to come back on again. But he doesn't move fast, so he knows that he's not going to make it. Not to mention when the light went out and then went back on, he heard something. And then when the light came back on, he could see them just on the outskirts of the light, these creatures. And he's like, I'm not going to make it.
No.
So he goes back inside. And to make a long story short, these creatures end up causing chaos for most of the night. And there were like 2 or 3 more of them that they observed from the window. And one of them might have been a juvenile one because it looked smaller and it was kind of riding on the back of another one. And they either like causing chaos and to terrify people, or they don't understand doors and windows and how those work, because there were just a lot of banging, a lot of scratching. They were walking on the roof. They're hearing a lot of stuff, but nothing ever tried to like break in. Nothing tried to like bust a window or bust through the door or anything. So it just caused chaos till like 5, 6 o'clock in the morning. And once the sun came up, they left and they went outside and they saw all these really strange footprints, with these claws. And there were claw marks on the house and other structures, because there's a bunch of structures on the property. And they saw all this stuff. And Shelley also talked about these other paranormal things happening that she didn't get into a lot of it, even with Linda. Like, there's some stuff she won't even talk about. I talked to her at one point, and it was only via Messenger on Facebook. She didn't want to talk to me on the phone or anything. I think, once the Sci-Fi Channel segment came out about the show, they were kind of inundated with a lot of people contacting them, and I was just another one, doing it. I think she talked to me because I was a Mainer, which was cool, but she basically confirmed a lot of the stuff in Linda's book, said the Sci-Fi Channel got a lot of stuff wrong, and then there's stuff that she'll never tell anyone, for whatever that's worth. So I think to this day, she hasn't shared everything that went on there, but fairly shortly thereafter, they got out of that property and moved into another place. But Linda shared the address. So my girlfriend and I have been to this area, and right across the street is a wildlife refuge, which says to me that's a perfect place for a dogman to hide. And we went there in the winter. And there were 2 sets of really big tracks leading either into or out of the woods. We have pictures of them, but, a lot of melt had happened, and, footprints, when it melts, they look strange, But it was creepy to see that across the street from the Palmyra Dogman farm. And also right next to the Dogman farm is this tiny little church, and it's got this wooden cross that was clearly handmade. It looks like this little tiny church out of like a Stephen King book. It's creepy as hell. But that's where we actually parked, and we were taking telephoto pictures of the farm property, because it's actually a business now.
Yes.
And we didn't want to like go onto the property and bother these people and all that stuff, but we parked at the church and we were taking pictures, and then we went over to the wildlife refuge area, and there's a little parking section for that too, and took a bunch of pictures over there. But it's a strange area, and that's, in short, that's the crux of the Dogman Palmyra, Maine story.
Yeah, it's a wild story, I have to say. I mean,
it is,
because Linda was such a diligent researcher.
She was.
That it was one of those encounters that I just scratched my head, because, as you say, there is often this secondary thing about these kind of encounters, is that people feel frightened, and it's almost as if wherever these things are, seem to enjoy having fun or scaring people without going the next step, where you've got certain other encounters where people have claimed to, they've chased them, and everybody says you can tell by looking at it, the size, the power, the claws, that this creature is fast. And if it wanted to catch you, it could. But it doesn't. It's almost as if you're a toy to it. You're some kind of entertainment. Oh, what should we do tonight? Let's go and frighten the humans. That's what we'll do Friday night. Let's get the whole pack together and we'll go. And it just seems to go on like this for them. So it is the strange aspect of quite a lot of these Dogman cases is this menacing fear that they seem to get enjoyment from. Yeah,
I agree. All of the Dogman stories that I've come across, for Maine stories, not to mention, all around the globe, but when I come across these stories, they're always super scary. And these creatures are looking to like scare them or terrorize people or something. It's not like, some docile Bigfoot story or like it's always some sort of like evil, I'm going to be attacked by these things. So those, I don't know if I've heard of a docile Dogman story. I think everything I've ever come across, there was some sort of terrifying element to it, Yeah.
Well, I don't think they need to do anything. If I stumbled across one of them, I'd be bricking it, Norma, because I know enough about wildlife to know that doesn't happen. Wolves don't run about on 2 legs. That's what I need. That's true. Well, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure to finally get a chance to speak to you for the first time. I hope it's not the last. No, I've thoroughly enjoyed having a chat with you about your wonderful state and some of the terrifyingly creepy things that are going on. And we've not even dove into the world of Cassie, which is your probably most famous denzine who hangs around off the coast. My friend, where can everybody follow your work, get books, keep up to date with what you've got going on? Please let them know.
Yeah. Well, first of all, you're a lovely individual, and this has been a very cool conversation. So thank you for making a very like chill, casual environment. That's very cool. But yeah, people can find my stuff all over Amazon. I do have my own website where you can get autographed books. But the easiest way to find me, because my name is so unique, is to Google my name, Nomar Slevik, and all of my stuff is going to come up. There's also allmylinks.com/Slevik, and that'll take you to my my own personal store, but also has links to documentaries I've made and my podcast and, all that good stuff. But if you just Google search my name, Nomar Slevik, it's all going to come up for you.
Fabulous. Well, as always, I'll put links in the show notes as well to help everybody track you down, my friend. And I hope I get a chance to speak to you later, because I know you've got a new project in the work. I think, are you doing a kind of overview collection of weird, creepy things from Maine?
Yeah. And, this time I'm covering not just UFOs and not just cryptids, but it's cursed lands. It's bizarre true crime, along with UFOs and cryptids, and all the good stuff. But yeah, expanding a little bit, there's a lot of bizarre true crime stuff that's happened in the state that, that's kind of new to me to research, because I'm always kind of in the cryptid and UFO and otherworldly world, but to find these really strange true crime stuff or people stories that are really bizarre is always fun. I'll tell you a really quick one just to whet the appetite. But there was this woman in the late 1800s or early 1900s. I forget the date now, but it's like 1890 to 1909, something like that in that time frame. Yeah. She was a young woman, 20-ish, and she was a church organist, and she went missing. And there was the town basically stopped what they were doing and searched for this woman for like 5, 6, 7 days. And 5 days later, they found her, and she was on the top of a tree alive. She doesn't even know how she got there. So I don't know if it was a fugue state sort of thing or if something else happened, but she was found in a tree alive, and she lived out the rest of her days happy as a clam. But that's a part of her life she can't explain.
Yeah. Well, nothing surprises me. You had that. Did you not have that before? Like you say, I'll throw one back at you. Didn't you have like a guy found who chained himself to a tree in the woods? And
I don't know if I know this story.
I'm sure there was a guy, and he'd got a history of mental illness, but this kind of leads people to think, oh, well, obviously, they didn't understand why he was found in the middle of the woods, chained to a tree, and he'd thrown the key away in the middle of winter. And I think
oh my God.
I think his family reported him missing because he told them he'd be back for Christmas dinner, and he didn't turn up. And then they got the police out. And then all of a sudden people are like, hang on, this guy's taken himself to the middle of the woods and chained himself to a tree because he wants to fast. And people are like, we know what kind of people do that.
Right. So was he tying himself up for a reason? Yeah. Jeez, I got to dig that up.
That's a crazy one. It's one of those lovely... Yeah. There's lovely little stories like that. There's one from the Bennington Triangle I love about a guy who was found crushed to death and nobody knows why. And the authorities said, a bear sat on him. What? A bear sat on him?
Right. Some of the explanations that people come up with, especially authority figures, is laughable compared to what we think, might have happened to some of these people. It's crazy.
Absolutely. Just because it's based in reality doesn't make it any less strange.
Right.
Well, as I said, it's been a real pleasure. I look forward to the next time we get a chance to speak, and thank you for your time and your wonderful conversation, Nomar.
Thank you so much. This has been great.